Why had my husband left his phone at home on the one Monday morning when my whole life was balanced on paperwork I had never seen? Who was the woman who texted him that she hated smiling at me across my own kitchen island while they counted down to a closing on Friday? And how much of our money, our savings, our retirement, our future had already been moved before I even finished my first cup of coffee? I remember the sound before I remember the words, a soft vibration against polished granite. A neat little hum in a house so quiet it felt staged, the kind of silence expensive homes have on weekday mornings, after the dishwasher stops and before the mail truck comes. Morning light was sliding through the back windows. It hit the white cabinets, the brushed steel fixtures, the bowl of lemons I replaced every Sunday, and Mark's phone, face up beside the coffee maker like it belonged there. It never belonged there. Mark took that phone into the shower, into the garage, into the backyard, if he was only letting the dog out for 30 seconds. He slept with it on his nightstand like it was a second pulse. For 29 years of marriage, I could count on one hand how many times he had forgotten it. My reading glasses were not where I'd left them. They were probably in the den, or buried in yesterday's sketch folder, or sitting absurdly in the refrigerator beside the cream the way I had once found them after a 14-hour day. So I leaned over the island and squinted. I could smell the coffee turning bitter on the warmer. I could still feel dish soap drying on the backs of my hands. The message lit up in full preview before the screen dimmed again. Escrow confirmed Friday at 11. Once Sarah signs, the condo is ours. I'm done pretending this is only about investment, and I'm done smiling at her in that kitchen. There was a name above it, Lena. I don't remember sitting down. I remember the room going very still and then suddenly very far away. I remember the coffee mug slipping in my hand and leaving a thin brown crescent on the white runner I'd ironed the day before. I remember my knees hurting in my slippers as if I had been standing for hours instead of seconds. And I remember the ugliest part, the part no one puts in stories when they want to look strong. My first thought wasn't even the affair. My first thought was Friday, the closing. Once Sarah signs. That was not romance. That was paperwork. That was a plan. That was my signature attached to something I had never agreed to. The second buzz came before I could breathe properly. Did you move the line yet? She asked if I was still the broker last night. Don't mess this up now. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I did what women do when the floor gives way under them and there is no one in the room to catch them. I got practical. I took a picture with my own phone, then another, then one wider, with Mark's watch beside the phone and the time on the microwave clock visible in the frame. Something in me had already become colder than grief. Mark had left 10 minutes earlier in his navy overcoat, kissed the side of my head, and said he might be late because he had a finance breakfast in the city. I could still hear the garage door. I could still smell his aftershave near the mudroom. And there I was, 57 years old, standing in the kitchen I had designed down to the drawer pulls, reading that another woman was tired of smiling at me across it while my husband prepared me to sign away part of my future. I called him once, straight to voicemail. I did not leave a message. Then I stood in the middle of my beautiful kitchen and looked around at the life I had built. The quartz, the pantry doors that closed without a sound, the framed charcoal sketch our daughter made in college, the stool our granddaughter always dragged over to help me bake. Every inch of that room had my fingerprints on it. And yet in one message, I understood something I had been refusing to name for months. Mark had not simply been drifting away from me. He had been reorganizing the architecture of our marriage without telling me. He had moved from distance to strategy. I called a lawyer before I called my husband. His name was Richard Henderson, though almost everyone over 50 in our part of Westchester called him Mr. Henderson, whether they liked him or feared him. He had silver hair, a courthouse voice, and the reputation of a man who never raised his volume because he never had to. I knew him through two things. One, he had once untangled a property dispute for a friend of mine after her brother tried to force a sale on their late mother's house. Two, Mark disliked him on sight. Mark said Henderson made normal people act like they were already in court. At the time, I thought that was one of Mark's charming opinions. On that Monday morning, I heard it differently. Some men hate the people who name things clearly. Mr. Henderson answered on the third ring. I told him my name, and then I heard my own voice wobble in a way that embarrassed me. I hated that even then, hated the tremor, Hated, sounding like the person being left behind instead of the person who understood the numbers. He asked one question. Is there property involved? I said yes. Is there a deadline? I said Friday at 11, according to the message. He was silent for one beat too long, and then he said, do not unlock his phone. Do not confront him yet. Photograph every visible message. Email those photographs to yourself and to a new private address. Then go to your home office, your printer tray, and any place your husband leaves financial papers when he is careless. Call me back in 20 minutes. His calm was so flat it felt cruel, but it also felt like a wall I could lean against. The printer in Mark's study had a single page in it, a title company cover sheet. My name was typed correctly, my married name. The address line beneath it was not my address. It was a luxury condominium development 15 minutes away, near the train, the kind of place with a concierge desk and tiny trees in matching planters. There was a box checked beside the words, spousal consent. The room tilted again. That was when the front lawn sprinkler clicked on outside the window, bright and stupid and punctual, and I understood that humiliation is rarely loud at first. Sometimes it sounds like ordinary machinery continuing without you. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. Just a reminder, this is a fictional dramatization for entertainment only. It's not professional legal, medical, or financial advice. Viewer discretion is advised. Enjoy the rest of the video. When people hear a story like this, they often imagine the betrayal starts with the message. It doesn't. The message is only where denial runs out of places to hide. The hurt had roots, deep ones. Mark and I were not one of those couples who married fast and spent the next decade wondering who they had chosen. We built each other slowly. I met him at 27, when I was working for a residential design firm and still carrying rolls of tracing paper in my trunk because I didn't trust myself to leave good work at the office. He was handsome in the polished, easy way that men in good wool coats can be handsome when they know how to ask questions and then act as if the answers matter. He sold commercial fixtures then. He talked about opening his own place someday. I talked about drawing kitchens for other women when I wanted to be shaping whole homes. He made me feel seen, and not in the cheap way. He remembered details. He noticed when I switched from silver jewelry to gold. He knew I hated carnations. He knew my father was the kind of man who would rather fix a window himself than pay someone who might do it badly. We started small. A rental with thin walls. One used sofa. A dining table bought from a couple moving to Florida. When our daughter Emily was born, I worked freelance at the kitchen table while she napped in a bassinet beside me. When our son Ben came 3 years later, I balanced invoices on one side of the table and coloring books on the other. Mark was good in those years. Or maybe I should say he was convincing in those years. Sometimes I still don't know which hurts more. The business grew because I made it grow. I can say that now without shame. Mark brought in clients. I turned promises into plans. I handled design revisions, bid comparisons, subcontractor disputes, vendor delays, and the 1,000 invisible adjustments that keep a company from becoming a man with a logo and a pile of excuses. When cash got tight, I stretched deposits. When a project soured, I kept the client from walking. When the housing market dipped, I redrew our forecasts and cut our overhead before Mark could posture us into debt. The showroom we eventually opened existed because I found the property, negotiated the purchase with my father's old caution in my bones, and used a modest inheritance from my aunt to close the gap on the down payment. Mark liked to tell people he had built everything from scratch. I used to smile and let him enjoy the line. I stayed quiet too long. That's the truth. Our house in Scarsdale came later, after the showroom took off, and Emily was old enough to complain about sharing a bathroom with her brother. It wasn't an old mansion, not some movie set. It was a gracious stone colonial on a quiet street with big maples and a driveway that curved just enough to make it feel dignified. The kitchen had once been dark and cramped. I opened it, moved a wall, brought in light, added the island, and made the room the center of the home. That kitchen became how people thought of us. Warm, successful, solid, holiday dinners, granddaughter on a stool dusted in flour, friends lingering over wine, Mark at one end carving meat and telling a story, me at the sink pretending not to watch who was actually doing the holding together. I don't remember the exact date things began to turn, but I remember the way the room went quiet at a charity event the first time Mark introduced Lena Cole to me. "She's helping with a development opportunity," he said. She was younger than I was by at least 15 years, maybe more. Elegant, composed, not flashy. That almost made it worse. Flashy women are easy to dismiss. Lena looked like competence in a cream coat. She smiled at me and complimented the kitchen in a tone so specific, I assumed Mark had already brought her through my house in conversation, if not in person. She said, "The island is beautiful. It's the first thing people notice." At the time, that sounded harmless. On Monday morning, with her message glowing in my hand, I heard it again and felt something colder than jealousy. Familiarity. She had not been admiring my kitchen. She had been measuring how comfortable she would be standing in it while lying to my face. Mr. Henderson called back exactly when he said he would. I read him the message. I described the title company sheet. I told him the condo address. He asked whether the house and the showroom were jointly held. I said yes, though my aunt's inheritance had been documented when we bought the showroom. He asked whether Mark had been pushing any paperwork recently. I thought of 3 things at once. A refinance discussion he had floated and then dropped. A routine annual authorization packet I had left on his desk 2 weeks earlier because the timing felt odd. And a joke he had made months before, half laughing, when he patted his coat pocket in the driveway and realized his phone was inside. He had said, "If I ever leave that thing behind, Sarah, you'll know I'm already someplace I shouldn't be." At the time, we both laughed. On Monday morning, those words came back like a nail under the skin. Mr. Henderson told me to check county records online for recent filings connected to the showroom property. He told me to search our shared email for the condo address and the word escrow. He told me one more thing, too, and I can still hear the low scrape of his voice through the receiver. "Mrs. Whitmore, the deadline matters because people do their dirtiest work in the gap between assumption and proof. If Friday is real, then someone believes they have your consent or can pressure it out of you before then." My stomach turned at that. Not the affair, not even the condo. The pressure, the assumption, the belief that I could be maneuvered. At 10:12, while I was in the den pulling up county records with my glasses finally found on top of a stack of fabric books, the landline rang. We kept the landline because Mark insisted some clients still trusted a house with a proper number. I almost ignored it. I answered on instinct. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Karen from the title office. I just wanted to confirm whether you'll be joining your husband in person on Friday or sending the notarized consent ahead of time." I looked straight through the den window at the bare branches in the backyard and felt my own pulse in my throat. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice steady because something in me had become a professional again. "Can you tell me what property this concerns?" A pause, paper moving. "The unit purchased through Hudson Crest Holdings. Mr. Whitmore indicated this was already discussed." No one says your marriage is collapsing in those words. They say already discussed. I told her there must be confusion and that I would call back. My hand shook so badly afterward I had to set the receiver down twice before I found the cradle. Hudson Crest Holdings was not a name I knew. But when I searched it in the email archive, 3 things surfaced. One was a forwarded zoning memo from 8 months earlier. One was a printer notification. And one was an accidental attachment Mark had apparently failed to delete from a chain about year-end tax positioning. It was a draft operating agreement. Sole manager, Mark Whitmore. Initial funding source, owner contribution and secured line. Secured by what? County records gave me the rest. A financing statement had been prepared but not fully recorded yet against the showroom property. Not finalized, not complete, moving toward complete. My mouth went dry as paper. We had 30 days before a balloon payment on an older business line adjusted. Mark had told me he was shopping terms. Now I saw the shape of the plan. He had not just been cheating, he had been using debt pressure to justify leverage. He was trying to roll our family business property into a personal escape hatch and drag my signature behind him like a formality. That was clock number 1, though I did not call it that then. Friday at 11 for the condo closing. 30 days on the business line. A wife expected to sign before either pressure point became visible to anyone else. Mr. Henderson met me that afternoon in his office, 2 blocks from the courthouse. The building smelled like old radiator heat and copy paper. There was a water stain on the ceiling of the hallway outside his suite, and for some reason I found that comforting. Not everything polished was safe. Not everything worn was weak. He studied the printed screenshots without dramatics. He read the operating agreement draft. He circled the word secured line with a fountain pen so dark it looked black-blue on the page. Then he folded his hands and asked me the question that split my life cleanly in two. Do you want to save the marriage, or do you want to save the assets while you still can? I hated him for asking it that plainly. My eyes burned. I looked down because I did not want a man like him to see me unravel. I could still picture Mark tying his tie in our bedroom mirror that morning. I could still hear him asking whether we needed more olive oil. Love does not disappear on schedule just because evidence arrives. Memory keeps arguing after the truth is already seated. I don't know, I said. Mr. Henderson nodded once, not kindly, not unkindly. Then decide this first. Do you want to be humiliated privately or strategically? Because your husband is counting on private humiliation. That sentence stayed with me. I drove home in late afternoon traffic with the heater too high, and my stomach clenched so hard I thought I might be sick at the next red light. I had planned a confrontation in the car, a clean one, a dignified one. The kind women imagine when they still believe truth alone has force. But when I pulled into the driveway and saw Mark's car already there, and the warm rectangle of kitchen light spilling across the stone path, I felt something else instead. Grief, yes. Rage, yes. But underneath both, an old professional instinct. Never walk into a room until you know what game is already in progress. Mark was at the island when I came in. Home early, sleeves rolled, one hand on a glass of sparkling water. He smiled as if we were any other couple on any other Monday. There you are, he said. I was starting to wonder if you got lost at the fabric warehouse. Fabric warehouse. It was the kind of offhand detail that made his lies strong. He always anchored them in something ordinary. I set my bag down carefully. Why did the title company call me this morning about a condo closing on Friday? There are moments when a person's face answers before their mouth does. His did. Not with guilt. With calculation. Fast. Surgical. I watched him sort options behind his eyes in less than a second. Then he exhaled through his nose and reached for the easiest insult available to men like him. Sarah, not this, not this, as if I had brought weather into the house. I asked you a question. He put the glass down. It's an investment vehicle. I was going to explain it once I had the structure finalized. With Lena? He blinked once. That was all. The first true crack. Lena is a broker. She texted your phone this morning. She said she was tired of smiling at me in my kitchen. His mouth thinned. He looked away for half a beat, then back. You read my phone? I read what lit up on the screen you left on my island. A little flare of annoyance crossed his face then, and I saw something that changed me more than the message had. He was not ashamed of betraying me. He was irritated that the timing had moved beyond his control. He laughed once, softly, like I was forcing him into an unnecessary scene. You're building a whole courtroom out of one message. No, I said. I'm building it out of a title call, a shell company, a secured line, and a condo closing scheduled for Friday. The silence that followed was not marital silence. It was adversarial silence. I knew it because I had lived through contract disputes, stalled permits, vendor lawsuits, and one spectacular flooring failure that nearly cost us a developer account. This was the quiet when each side realizes the other one has actual paperwork. Mark recovered quickly. He always did. Fine, he said. Do you want the grown-up version? The market is changing. We need flexibility. The condo is a hedge. Lena found it. I moved quickly because hesitation costs money. That's what successful people do. Successful people. I stared at him. And the part where she's tired of smiling at me? He rubbed his jaw. That was inappropriate. I won't defend that. There are lies, and then there are strategic concessions. Small truths offered like crumbs, so the larger lie can survive. I said, Are you sleeping with her? He held my gaze, and in that moment, I finally understood how many months of rehearsal had gone into him. I'm sleeping in a marriage that has been dead for years, he said. It was such a practiced sentence, I almost admired the polish. I don't know what expression crossed my face, but he softened his voice after that. Not because he cared, because he saw an angle. Sarah, you've been unhappy for a long time. We both have. I didn't know how to tell you that I needed something to change without you making everything into a moral indictment. Moral indictment, I repeated. You tried to leverage our business property to buy a condo for your affair. That's not what happened. Then tell me what did. He spread his hands. I'm trying to protect our future. Our kids are grown. We need options. A place near the train, an investment, a tax position, whatever you want to call it. And yes, Lena and I became close. It happened after years of distance, after years of you caring more about tile samples and payroll than me. There it was, the punishment portion. If a woman is betrayed, there must be a way to make her labor look like neglect. I could smell garlic from the skillet behind him. He had started dinner. That almost undid me more than his words. Betrayal looks obscene when it wears weekday manners. I want every document on the condo, I said. Every document on the secured line. Every communication involving the showroom property. Tonight. He laughed again, louder this time. No, I had not expected the bluntness of that. Not yet. No, I said. No, because you are emotional, and emotional people make reckless decisions. I'm not handing you half-prepared business paperwork so you can run to your little circle and turn this into a public meltdown. My little circle. In one sentence, I became suburban, female, unstable, and unserious. I said, I've signed every major contract in that company for 20 years. You've signed what I put in front of you when it made sense. The room actually seemed to contract. He stepped closer then, voice lower. Listen to me carefully. If you blow this up before Friday, the deposit goes, the line gets ugly, staff start hearing things, and then we're not talking about hurt feelings anymore. We're talking about payroll, debt, reputation, and whether the kids see us self-destruct over something that could still be managed privately. Managed privately. Again, that was his model. Humiliate in private. Extract consent in private. Preserve his image in public. I should tell you, I did not scream. I did not throw the skillet. I did not give him the kind of scene television teaches people to expect. I stood there in my own kitchen with my hands flat on the island and said, I am not signing anything on Friday. And for the first time, I saw fear in him. Not heartbreak, not regret, exposure. The next 48 hours taught me how fast a husband can become a campaign. By Tuesday morning, Emily had texted me from Connecticut asking if everything was okay because Dad said I was really overwhelmed and had misunderstood a business message. She attached a photo of Lucy in ballet shoes and added, Please don't do anything dramatic before the recital this weekend. I stared at that word for a long time. Dramatic, the oldest tool in the box. A woman sees the knife. A man says she's reacting to the gleam. Ben called from his apartment in New Jersey just after lunch. He sounded tired and careful. Mom, Dad says there's some kind of investment issue and you're upset. Upset, I said. Your father is buying a condo with another woman and trying to tie our business property to it. Silence. Then, he said she's a consultant. Of course he did. Ben exhaled. Mom, I'm not taking sides. I just don't want this turning into one of those family situations where nobody can come back from what they say. That one cut deeper than he knew, because what he was really asking me to do was protect the possibility of future comfort by absorbing present betrayal without making it expensive. At church on Wednesday, a woman I had known for 15 years squeezed my forearm and asked, far too gently, whether I was taking enough time for myself lately. Another one told me she had heard Mark was under tremendous business stress and that men sometimes pull away when they feel they're carrying too much. Carrying too much. I stood in the church parking lot under a pale, thin sun and realized Mark had already been laying emotional insulation around himself, not enough to reveal an affair, just enough to prepare the ground in case I spoke. That was the first visible status inversion. He, the dignified provider under stress. Me, the wife who might be misunderstanding because she was lonely, overworked, hormonal, aging, dramatic, pick your word. It was social leverage, and he knew exactly how to use it. The financial threat sharpened too. An email came through from our office manager asking why Mark had removed me from a Thursday lender call involving renewal strategy. When I told her I had not stepped back from anything, she grew so silent I could hear the hum of fluorescent lights on her end. 10 minutes later, my company login stopped working. I sat in the breakfast nook, staring at the error message while rain began tapping at the window over the sink. There is a specific humiliation in being locked out of the machine you helped build. Not because of the technology, because of the story beneath it. Someone believed they had authority to erase your access and then tell others it was orderly. Mr. Henderson did not comfort me when I called. He said, "Good. Now we have another fact." Then he instructed me to document the lockout, send a preservation demand regarding digital records, and meet him with any original ownership documents I still had from the showroom purchase. Any original ownership documents. I knew exactly where some of them were, or I thought I did. Back of the hall closet, top shelf, in a banker's box beneath old school projects and Christmas table runners. Except when I climbed up there in my house shoes, knee aching, purse still on my shoulder because I had forgotten to take it off, the banker's box was lighter than it should have been. Not empty. Edited. That is the right word. Edited. The tax returns were there, some insurance files, a copy of the deed. But the red tab binder my father had insisted I keep with the formation papers and side agreements for the showroom purchase was gone. I sat on the closet floor among old wrapping paper tubes and a coat I hadn't worn in 3 winters, and I had the most humiliating thought of all. Maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I had become exactly the woman Mark was quietly telling people I was. Frayed, forgetful, emotional. My hands shook so hard I almost didn't get up. I almost stayed on that floor and let confusion do the work he wanted it to do. Then I remembered something small. A detail so ordinary I might have missed its value if I weren't already being taught to respect details again. 2 months earlier, while looking for passport photos before a trip we never ended up taking, I had moved the red tab binder to the cedar chest in our bedroom because I didn't want it bent under the holiday boxes. I could smell the cedar before I even opened the lid. It was there, still, quiet, waiting. Inside was everything my younger self had once thought was excessive. The original shareholder structure, the closing statement for the showroom purchase, a side letter documenting my inheritance contribution, and one clause Mr. Henderson later tapped twice with his pen and called the hinge. Any debt secured by the property above a defined threshold required written consent by both equity holders, not assumed consent, not marital consent, written consent, specific, dated. Mark either had not remembered the clause, had hoped I had forgotten it, or believed he could pressure me into signing before anyone looked closely. That red tab binder became the clue object that changed the shape of the war. Wednesday afternoon, a courier delivered a large envelope with no return address. Inside was a polished packet on heavy paper, cover sheet, signature tabs, a draft spousal consent. My name printed beneath a line already sticky marked in yellow. The pages smelled faintly of toner and rain. I stood at the kitchen island with the envelope open like an autopsy and thought, he really thought I would sign this in my own kitchen after being lied to in it. Clock number 2 arrived with Mr. Henderson's voice on the phone an hour later. "If we want to stop Friday cleanly," he said, "I need everything filed by 4 tomorrow. After that, title will say they relied on represented authority, and unwinding it gets more expensive. Not impossible. More expensive. By then, cost had become its own character in the story. Deposit money, legal fees, reputation, staff nerves, my children's trust, sleep, appetite, dignity. Every major decision costs something. That part is real. That evening, Daniel Mercer knocked on my back door carrying tomato soup in a glass container and looking like he regretted knocking before I even opened it. Daniel had lived 3 houses down for 12 years, widower, retired CPA. Gentle in the way some men become after surviving enough loss to stop performing certainty. He had helped our street organize tax appeals once and had quietly advised me years earlier when Mark wanted to take on too much equipment debt during a boom cycle. "I made too much," he said, holding up the container, "and I saw your porch light on." I almost told him to go away. Pain does that. It makes kindness feel like exposure, but he had already seen my face. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, "but if this is financial as well as personal, don't let embarrassment make you slow." It was such a Daniel thing to say. Not poetic, useful. I should have thanked him. Instead, I heard myself say, too sharp, "Please don't make me the neighborhood case study." His expression changed just a little. Not anger, hurt, covered by manners. "I wasn't planning to," he said, and handed me the soup. After he left, I stood at the sink with the lid in my hand and hated myself. Pain had made me push away one of the only ethical people in range because his steadiness reminded me how unstable my own house had become. I did call him the next morning to apologize. He said, "You don't owe me grace in the middle of a fire, Sarah." Then, because he was Daniel, he added, "But I'll take your tax statements if you want another set of eyes." By Thursday morning, Mark shifted tactics. He came into the kitchen in a blue sweater I had bought him for Christmas and made eggs like nothing catastrophic had happened. He moved easily, calmly. That was always his talent. He could make a room feel unreasonable for reacting to what he had done inside it. "I've been thinking," he said, setting a plate in front of me I had not asked for. "We can handle this better." I laughed once, short and ugly. "Better for who?" "For everyone," he said. "Especially the kids." He sat across from me and put both hands around his coffee mug as if he were the one seeking warmth. "I should have told you sooner that the marriage wasn't working," he said. "That part is on me. But the condo isn't what you've made it into. It was supposed to be a transition asset, something flexible, something that could keep us both from blowing up everything." "Us both," I said. "You listed it under your holding company. That was for speed. You had Lena coordinating the closing. She knows the market. You told the title office I would sign." He looked tired on purpose. "That's the only way I can say it. Men like Mark know when exhaustion makes them look reasonable." "Because I believed," he said slowly, "that once the initial emotion passed, you'd understand the practical side." Practical, as if adultery plus concealed debt was a spreadsheet disagreement. Then he played the false peace card. "I don't want war, Sarah. Sign the consent. Let the purchase close. We can formalize a separation quietly. You keep the house until we decide what's next. I'll make sure you're protected by the man creating the danger." For one shameful second, the exhaustion in me reached toward the offer, not because I trusted him, because peace is seductive when you haven't slept. Your children are cautious around you. Women in church are lowering their voices, and every document seems to threaten something bigger. The idea of postponing humiliation, even on bad terms, can feel like relief. That was his false victory. He could sense it too. He softened his eyes. "I'm trying to keep your life from becoming smaller than it needs to be," he said. Then he slid the folder across the island. Paper makes betrayal visible in a way words don't. The consent page was clipped on top. Beneath it, a proposed temporary arrangement, house expenses, access dates, a transfer of management authority for the business during transition. My stomach dropped. He wasn't offering peace. He was offering structure for my own sidelining. And then I saw the detail that didn't fit. There, on page 6, tucked in the lower corner beside a sticky tab, was a line for a mobile notary appointment already penciled in for that afternoon. Not tomorrow, not after discussion, already arranged. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to complete. That was foreshadowing number 2, though I did not name it then. The small detail that tells you someone is not speaking from emotion at all. Someone is playing chess. My hands shook. I hate admitting that, but they did. I folded them in my lap under the counter because I did not want him to see. I told myself it wasn't my place to explode. I told myself calm was power, and for once, that was true. "I need time to review this," I said. His jaw shifted. "There isn't much time." "I know. Sarah, be careful not to confuse pride with strategy." I looked at him then and understood that he had been counting on guilt all along. Guilt for the children, guilt for the business, guilt for the employees, guilt for the years I had spent choosing function over romance because somebody had to keep the roof from leaking and the payroll from bouncing. He wanted my dignity translated into stubbornness so he could punish it. I did not sign. He left in a controlled silence that afternoon, taking the folder with him. But he made one mistake before he went. He set his coffee mug down near the edge of the island and stepped away when his watch buzzed. I caught a flash of text across the face before he turned his wrist inward. Delete the old thread. Old thread. Another line, another channel, another game already in motion. That night, the house felt different. Not emptier. More watch. I checked the mudroom drawer where we kept spare keys. 2 were missing. The alarm code no longer accepted mine. I had to use the secondary panel through the garage. When I logged into our shared cloud drive from the den, 3 folders had been locked. Insurance, vendor contracts, banking correspondence. The false peace collapsed all at once after that. Friday morning was no longer only about the condo closing. It was about how far ahead Mark had already moved behind my back. Mister. Henderson filed before the deadline, sending notice to the title company, the lender counsel, and Mark's attorney, who apparently had been retained longer than I had been led to believe. That part stung in a fresh way. While I was still deciding whether my marriage could be spoken about in the past tense, he had already hired representation. Then came the next layer. At 8:17 on Friday morning, our office manager forwarded me a meeting invite she had assumed I was copied on. Special board session, Monday at 9 a.m. Agenda, interim authority, debt restructuring, operational continuity. Our board was small, mostly formal. Me, Mark, 2 outside advisors, and 1 long-retired contractor who still held a sliver of shares from the earliest days. Special board session meant one thing. Mark was trying to create a paper story in which I had stepped back, become unstable, or was obstructing necessary financing. If he could box me out of operations before the asset fight matured, he could turn marital betrayal into corporate necessity. Clock number 3 slammed into place right there. Monday at 9 a.m., irreversible enough to wound even if we later won. The second loss hit before noon. Emily called crying. Not angry this time, crying because Mark had told her the business might collapse if I kept refusing to be reasonable. He had framed it as one of those unfortunate later-in-life marital situations where assets get tied up because one spouse wants revenge. Revenge. I let her speak. Then I asked only one question. Did your father tell you he already had an attorney before he sat at our kitchen island asking me to sign? She went quiet. Deep, stunned quiet. Sometimes truth doesn't need a speech. It needs a timestamp. Still, the smear worked enough to hurt. Ben texted that he needed space from the details. My sister-in-law Dana sent one of those awful messages that begin with "I love you both" and end with a request for dignity, which always means silence for the injured person and image protection for the one causing the injury. At the grocery store, I ran into a couple from church and watched them switch to overbright cheerfulness when they saw me. Public reputation doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment. It softens at the edges first. People stop asking direct questions. They study your face for confirmation of rumors they would never admit hearing. That afternoon, another pattern interrupt arrived. A voicemail. Female voice. Tight. Professional. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Colleen from escrow. We received a voice authorization referencing your non-appearance and alternate signature handling, but counsel has now instructed us to pause. Please have your attorney contact ours immediately. Voice authorization. I played it 3 times, then 4. Not my voice. Not my authority. A voice authorization from someone speaking as if my signature problem had already been solved. When Mr. Henderson heard it, he became even quieter than usual. Save it in 3 places, he said, and check the phone records if you have access. He may be using another line. I did. A second line existed under a bundled family account Mark managed. Small monthly charge. Easy to overlook. It had started 11 months earlier. That was foreshadowing number 3. Not just that he had lied, that he had built parallel communication as infrastructure. The phone he left on the island had not been his only phone. It had become, in a terrible way, his decoy life. The message that devastated me was the one he did not even realize could still hurt him. By Saturday, I stopped trying to preserve what was already gone and started preserving what still mattered. That shift was not dramatic from the outside. It looked like paperwork, containers, copies, calls returned in full sentences, but inside me it felt like a door closing and another one opening on the same hinge. Mr. Henderson connected me with a forensic accountant he trusted. Daniel Mercer spent 2 hours at my dining table reviewing prior year statements and tracing timing gaps on line renewals. He found something simple and ugly. Mark had been moving money in increments too small to alarm the casual eye. Consulting expenses, travel reimbursements, furnishing advances tied to staging. Nothing cinematic, just disciplined leakage, enough to support a separate life, enough to understate our real liquidity during debt discussions, enough to make me furious at myself for every month I had let him say, "Don't worry, I'm handling the finance side of that." I opened an individual account in my name. I redirected the design retainers that were legally mine. I changed beneficiary designations where I had sole authority. I updated my will and health proxy. I made copies of the red tab binder, the screenshots, the draft consent, the voicemail transcript, the title pause, the board invite, and the phone records showing the second line. I placed one full set in Mr. Henderson's office, one in a safe deposit box, and one in a canvas portfolio in Daniel's guest room because he lived close and trusted paper more than clouds. I also did something that hurt more than any filing. I called my children and said, "I am not asking you to pick a parent. I am asking you not to sign anything, witness anything, move anything, or repeat anything your father says about business or property without checking with me first." Emily cried again. Ben apologized for staying vague. I told them both the same thing. You do not have to comfort me. You do have to stay out of his paperwork. Late Sunday afternoon, I asked Lena to meet me in the parking lot of a diner off the parkway. I know some people would call that foolish, but I needed one thing only another woman at the center of a lie might know. She arrived in a camel coat and looked worse than I did. That surprised me. She was not glowing. She was frayed. "I didn't come here to fight," I said. She nodded once. "Good." Rain ticked softly on both our cars. We stood under the edge of the awning near the soda machine. Two women with the same man's shadow on them in different ways. "Did he tell you we were separated?" I asked. Her face gave me the answer before she spoke. "He said it was done in every way that mattered," she said. "He said the house was a business arrangement and that you knew a transition was happening." I looked away because the shame in that was not hers. It was mine only if I carried it, and I was tired of carrying what belonged to him. "He told the title people I would sign," I said. She closed her eyes for a second. "I know." "Did you know he had a second phone line?" Her eyes opened. "Yes." That hurt. Not because she knew, because I had not. Then she said something unexpected. I thought it was because he was paranoid about privacy during the divorce. Divorce. A whole noun he had apparently been living inside while still asking me what we needed from the grocery store. I said, "There was no divorce." Lena looked sick after that. Truly sick. She sat in her car for a full minute after I left, head tipped back against the seat, not moving. I never liked her. I never needed to. But in that moment, I understood she had also been sold a version of Mark that served Mark. That did not absolve her. It clarified the architecture. He had not created two relationships. He had created two audiences. By Monday morning, I was calm enough to be dangerous. There is a kind of calm that comes from peace. Mine did not. Mine came from sequence. I knew what I had. I knew what he had hidden. I knew where the weak joints were. I knew the board clause. I knew the second line. I knew the title hold was active. I knew the voice authorization existed. I knew the lender would not enjoy learning about undisclosed self-dealing tied to a personal purchase. And I knew, most of all, that I was done trying to look nice while being dismantled. I wore a navy blazer, low heels because my knee was still bothering me, and pearl studs my mother used to say made any woman look less likely to be interrupted. I arrived at the showroom conference room 15 minutes early. The glass walls reflected the morning in strips. Sample cabinets lined the hallway. The smell of sawdust from the fabrication side drifted faintly under the office door. I had chosen those finishes. I had laid out the lighting plan. I had argued for the wider conference table because people negotiate better when they aren't perched like birds. It mattered to me that I walked in before Mark. Mr. Henderson sat beside me with a legal pad and a leather file that looked older than some marriages. Daniel sat near the far end as a witness on financial questions. The two outside advisors arrived looking cautious. The retired contractor, Joe Banner, looked annoyed to be there at all until he saw my face, and then looked annoyed at the right person. Mark entered last, crisp, composed, carrying a folder and an expression of managerial sorrow. That expression lasted 3 minutes. He opened with something rehearsed about personal transitions and operational continuity. He mentioned stress. He mentioned timing. He mentioned the need to protect staff from turbulence. Then he moved toward the heart of his plan, suggesting temporary sole authority over debt matters while I took space from emotional pressure. Mr. Henderson let him talk. That was the first real kindness he ever did for me. He let Mark build his own scaffold. Then Henderson slid the red tab binder into the center of the table. Before any authority discussion proceeds, he said, the board should review the consent requirements in the original governing documents and the evidence of undisclosed self-dealing tied to a pending personal real estate acquisition. It is a beautiful thing, if you have suffered enough, to watch a room stop believing the polished version. Mark tried the first defense. He called the condo an exploratory investment. Henderson laid down the title packet with the Friday closing time. Mark tried the second. He said there was no improper funding. Daniel laid down the expense traces and the draft secured line structure. Mark tried the third. He said I had known separation was coming. Henderson laid down the voicemail about voice authorization and the phone records for the second line. Mark tried to dismiss Lena as an overeager broker. Henderson laid down a copy of the message from the phone he left on my island. That message. The same one that had made me physically cold on Monday morning. Now it sat in black and white in front of a conference table full of people Mark needed. That is what I mean when I say emotional payoff matters more than factual payoff. The fact was always the fact, but the payoff came from where it landed. Not in my kitchen, in his arena. Joe Banner read the line about smiling at me in my kitchen and muttered, "Jesus." One of the outside advisors removed his glasses and polished them slowly, the way older men do when buying time around ugliness they did not expect to witness. The other asked the only question that mattered. "Mark, were you attempting to secure company-linked debt to support a personal residence purchase not disclosed to your co-owner?" Not wife, co-owner. That word alone felt like oxygen. Mark's composure cracked then, not into remorse, but anger. "This is a marital dispute being weaponized into governance," he said. Mr. Henderson did not even blink. "No. This is governance being used to document a marital dispute that you attempted to conceal through governance." I had never loved a sentence more. The board voted that morning to suspend unilateral debt authority pending full review. They authorized an independent audit. They froze property-backed restructuring not jointly approved. And because the self-dealing evidence was too clear to ignore, they removed Mark from interim authority over any transaction involving real estate, secured lines, or related party contracts. That was status inversion number 4, visible, public, social. The man who had quietly framed me as unstable lost access in a room designed to trust him. But the public climax was not finished. At 1:30 that afternoon, we were at the courthouse on an emergency asset preservation application tied to the failed closing and the threatened encumbrance of jointly held property. Courthouse air has its own sound. Shoes on old tile, printer trays opening and closing, voices kept too low to be private and too tight to be casual. Mark stood across the hallway with his attorney, one hand in his coat pocket, staring at the floor as if thoughtfulness could replace accountability. He looked older that day, truly older, not because of punishment, because performance costs energy, and his had finally exceeded its balance. The hearing itself was brief in the way important things often are when the paper trail is strong. Henderson presented the timeline, the paused closing, the undisclosed second line, the voicemail implying alternate signature handling, the draft secured debt structure. My counsel requested preservation of assets, restraint on unilateral transfers, and temporary exclusive control over the house pending fuller proceedings because of threatened dissipation and access interference. Mark's attorney tried the expected path. Overheated marital misunderstanding, premature inferences, normal business planning. But there is only so much air in those arguments once documents start lining up by date. The court entered temporary restraints that afternoon. No sale. No new lien. No unilateral transfer. No disposal of key records. Temporary exclusive occupancy of the house to me. Additional review to follow. Why had Mark left the phone at home? Because he had become so used to managing 2 lives through 2 lines that he forgot the old line could still expose the new one. Who was the woman? Not just an affair. A participant in a false future financed with leverage that was never his alone to use. How much of our future had already been moved before I finished my coffee? Enough to wound us. Not enough to defeat me once the paper came into daylight. He caught up with me outside the courtroom as Henderson stepped aside to take a call. The hallway was cool. I could hear a vending machine humming near the elevators. Was this really necessary? Mark asked. That question, after all of it, necessary. I looked at him for a long time. The man I had loved was still in there somewhere, layered beneath vanity, appetite, fear of aging, and the craving to feel chosen by someone who had not watched him become ordinary. I could see that. That is what made the ending mature instead of theatrical. Mark was not a cartoon villain. He was a man who wanted admiration without cost and control without confession. He let pride and status anxiety make him cruel. "Yes," I said, "because you were willing to make me disappear on paper before you let yourself look bad in public." He flinched then, not at the legal trouble, at the accuracy. I did not go home triumphant. That part matters. Victories like this do not feel clean. I went home drained, hollowed out, and strangely steady. The house was quiet when I opened the back door. Late light lay across the granite island. Same kitchen, same lemons, same stool by the pantry, different life. The weeks that followed were not magic. There were depositions, valuations, settlement drafts, appraisals, insurance untangling, tax consultations, and one particularly ugly argument over whether certain furnishings belonged to the house or to business staging inventory. A phrase so absurd it almost made me laugh in the middle of grief. Money and legacy always get petty around the edges when the center collapses. In the end, the settlement looked less cinematic than people might want and more just than Mark deserved. I kept controlling ownership in the business because the documents supported it and the audit left no room for his narrative. He took a structured buyout over time on terms he did not like, but had to accept once the debt maneuvering was exposed. The condo never closed. The deposit was lost. That loss came out of the web he had spun, not from me signing under pressure. The Scarsdale house remained mine for the transitional period. Then later, I chose to sell it on my own terms when the rooms stopped feeling like mine and started feeling like evidence. Lena disappeared from our orbit after giving a statement through counsel. I heard, much later, that she had moved out of the county and started over in another firm. I felt no urge to follow the trail. Her consequences were different from mine, but they were still consequences. She had trusted a man who lied professionally and domestically. That lesson would follow her farther than my anger ever could. Emily came around first. She showed up one Saturday with Lucy and a bakery box, and stood in my foyer crying before she even took her coat off. "I'm sorry I asked you not to be dramatic," she said. I held her and smelled cold air and vanilla frosting and my granddaughter's shampoo, and I thought, this is what truth returns when it is patient enough. Ben took longer. Not because he loved me less, because sons sometimes need more time to understand the scale of a father's performance. When he finally did, he came with a toolbox and fixed a cabinet hinge that had annoyed me for months without saying much at all. Men apologize in verbs sometimes. As for Mr. Henderson, I eventually told him that his office was the least cozy room in New York and that he had the bedside manner of a locked file drawer. He almost smiled. "And yet," he said, "that was our version of warmth. We never became friends in the sentimental sense. But every now and then I send his office a Christmas card, and every year he sends one back with exactly 6 words written inside. Hope the documents are behaving themselves." A year later, I moved into a smaller stone front house 10 minutes away. Not grand, clean, light where it needed to be. A kitchen I renovated for myself, not for entertaining, though people still gather there because apparently I don't know how to design any other kind. The mortgage is manageable. The property taxes still annoy me on principle. The business runs leaner now, and better. Fewer vanity projects, more work I actually want. I keep Fridays lighter. I no longer confuse busyness with loyalty. On Sundays, Emily brings Lucy and sometimes her new baby boy. Ben comes when he can. We eat roast chicken or baked ziti or soup if the weather turns. The children play in the yard, where an old maple drops leaves too early every fall. Sometimes Daniel Mercer comes over with a pie. He pretends he did not bake himself. There was never a grand romance there, not in the dramatic sense. Just companionship that grew honest roots after the lies were cut away. Mature coexistence, real friendship, the kind that doesn't need to arrive in time to save you in order to still matter. Mark sees the grandchildren, slowly, carefully. The distance is necessary. I do not poison the children against him. I don't need to. Adults reveal themselves over time. He lost more than money. He lost the authority to define events after causing them. That is a larger loss than most men realize until it happens. Sometimes late in the afternoon, when the house is quiet and the dishwasher is running and the light goes soft on the counters, I think about that Monday morning in Scarsdale. The vibration on granite, the missing glasses, the bitter coffee, the message that split my life open. And I understand something I didn't understand then. I was not devastated only because my husband had betrayed me. I was devastated because I saw how calmly he had expected me to help arrange my own replacement. The pain was in the affair. The fury was in the paperwork. I keep one item from that old life in the top drawer of my desk now. Not the screenshots, not the consent packet, not the second phone records. Those live in a sealed legal file where they belong. What I keep is an old photograph of the first showroom before we renovated it. Bare walls, folding tables, paint cans, me in jeans with my hair tied back, smiling at a space that looked impossible and seeing what it could become. Sometimes I take it out and remember that the truest thing about me was never wife, never betrayed wife. It was builder. And tucked behind that photograph is a single copy of the red tab clause my father insisted I keep all those years ago. The language is dry, boring really. Consent requirements, ownership thresholds, signatures. But whenever I touch that page, I remember what saved me in the end. Not vengeance, not luck, not a dramatic confession under perfect lighting. Process, records, consequences. And the moment I stopped begging to be understood by the person working hardest to misread me. There is still one unresolved thread, if I'm honest. Not a cliffhanger, just life. In a small box in my closet are a few things from the old house I haven't sorted yet. A holiday table runner, a chipped ornament Lucy once dropped and cried over, a set of recipe cards in my mother's handwriting, and one house key from Scarsdale on a brass ring Mark used to carry. I found it months after the sale in the back of a drawer. Sometimes I think about throwing it away. Sometimes I think about mailing it to him with no note. Most days I just leave it there. Not because I'm stuck, because some objects deserve to go quiet before they go gone. That is the part no one tells you when your life breaks open after 50. The new beginning is not loud. It is not revenge music and slam doors, and everyone finally saying you were right. It is smaller than that, truer. It is sleeping through the night in a house where no one is drafting your erasure in the next room. It is opening your mail without dread. It is signing only what you have read twice. It is grandchildren at the table, a clean counter, an honest ledger, and a peace that does not depend on pretending. And if one day a phone vibrates on a kitchen island in some other beautiful house where a woman has been told she is too much, too emotional, too dramatic, too late, I hope she remembers this. A house falls on paper first, but a woman can rebuild from paper too. Thanks for watching until the end. If this story touched you, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. As a final reminder, this was a fictional dramatization for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, medical, or financial advice. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next story.